Communist Party has a plan to destroy religion, and it begins with the red market. Can religion survive in China? Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party has a clever plan to destroy religion in China. It doesn't just attack religion from the outside, it also tries to subvert it from within. Shelley Zhang is back with part 2 of her interview with Marco Respinti, the director in charge of Bitter Winter, who's exposing this issue.
Mr. Respinti, thank you for joining us in this park in Milan.
Thank you.
So I do have to say that a lot of the things that you report on Bitter Winter, I really haven't seen reported anywhere else. For example, last year the Chinese government passed this new regulations on religious affairs. Could you talk a little bit about that and the impact that it's had?
Yeah, the regulation was published officially in February the 1st, 2018, but it was in the air for some months before. That was a really turning point in the attitude of the CCP toward religion, because it's a very strict law that almost forbids every kind of religion public manifestation. The CCP has been convinced since years, and when I say years, it means decades, that from the Mao Zedong times on, that religion is an unnatural thing, and that naturally it will go extinct someday. But you know, also they saw that that didn't happen so fast. So they managed to help the extinction of religion. So while they still think that religion will die out naturally, sometimes they help this process. And the new regulation on religious affairs have been designed just for that, to help in a very effective way the extinction of religion. Today, the religious market or landscape can be divided into 3 main areas. According to some Chinese sociologists who studied religion in China, they can be divided into the gray market, black market, red market. The red market is what is the attempt by the CCP to tame and domesticate religion, trying to infiltrate and control them. And so this is why they created 5 so-called patriotic associations back in the 50s to control Protestant, Catholics, Taoists, Buddhists, and Muslims. And this is the red market, the official religion. Then we have the gray market, which is a kind of mixed area in which religion is not permitted, but it is tolerated at some extent, because the religious group populating this gray area are so huge or connected to some.
What would these groups be?
For example, the Catholic Church for many time, or the Protestant non-patriotic church called the House Church. It's a huge network of Protestant churches, very difficult to control and to infiltrate. So even if they are considered enemy of the state, like every kind of religious group, they are tolerated because they cannot be repressed directly. So they are expecting them to die out, helping them, but you know, tolerating them to some extent. And then we have the third area, the black market, where the groups belonging to this area are called xiejiao, meaning unorthodox, heterodox. Heterodox.
Yeah,
heterodox teaching. It's an old expression used by the Chinese power back in the old days, which has been resurrected by the CCP to mean cults. So this is a label through which they condemn these groups like criminals, and just belonging to one of these groups is one of the most awful crime that you can do in China. So these people belonging to the black market are persecuted directly. The other groups are infiltrated, controlled, but this is not because the CCP is good toward them, but because it doesn't have enough power yet to repress directly all of them. So it tries to infiltrate and to control them in an indirect way.
So the black market would be like which groups?
Like Falun Gong, for example, who has been exterminated literally in huge numbers. The Church of the Almighty God, which is noteworthy because it's the youngest new religious group in China and the one who is growing at a faster pace. So it's very huge and it's persecuted to them. It has been called the new Falun Gong, not because of theology, they have a completely different theology, but because of the persecution they're suffering. Or groups like the Shouters, who are a new religious movement coming out of the Protestant universe, so to speak. So many groups who are considered cults. Which, by the way, it's an expression that scholars don't use because it's a way of labeling or giving names to your opponent, and it's not very scholarly to use that. So the CCP is condemning directly these people and it's persecuting directly these people. To the grey market, so the middle of the road place. One thing which is not worthy to say is that they try, as I said, to control, infiltrate them because they don't have the power to repress them directly, or because they have connection internationally. For example, the Catholic Church. One thing is to say the Catholic Church is my enemy, and the CCP is not using anymore that language. And another thing is trying to repress that. How can you repress a thing like the Vatican, the Catholic Church, which is all over the world, powerful at some extent? So it's not a matter sometimes of the size of the group, but the connection they have. For example, the Falun Gong, when it was persecuted in the first time, it didn't have so much connection abroad, so it was a kind of internal affair for China. And the Church of the Almighty God, it's another persecuted group who had no connection before they escaped China, or the connection they have now is not so strong, huge, and recognized publicly as the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church. So it's easier for the CCP to go and repress them in the dark.
Yes, and like you said, to use 邪教, which does not mean cult in Chinese, but to translate that as cult and use that label on these groups.
Yeah.
Where would Tibetan Buddhists and like Uyghur Muslims or Kazakh Muslims fall in this hierarchy?
Yeah, this is a good question, because officially Islam could at some extent belong to the first area, the red market, because there is the Chinese, the Islamic Chinese Association, which is the patriotic trying of controlling them. So if you Muslim belong or comply to that association, you're tolerated officially. But if you don't, you are persecuted. But what group do you belong? I would say the middle of the road, because they cannot define, even if some try to define even Christianity as a cult, they cannot define Islam as a cult. So Islam will not belong to the black market. It would belong to the gray market, theoretically. But you understand that these divisions are very important for scholars to try to figure the situation out. But on the ground, the boundaries between these groups can easily be overlapped and become, depending on some official, they can be completely ignored. As a matter of fact, in Xinjiang, Islam is persecuted as such. Uyghurs who are Muslim are persecuted because they are non-Chinese, non-Han Chinese, because they belong to a different minority. And some people would think that this belongs to some political and not religious reason. But this is not true, because alongside the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, all the Turkic people and Muslim people are persecuted. Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Tatars, and all these people. So they are persecuted because they are minorities and Muslim. But again, we have some Muslims who are not, who don't belong to, who are not part of any ethnic group, like the Hui Muslim. They are Han Chinese, being Muslim, and they were once the good Muslim, this is the words of the CCP, against the bad Muslim in Xinjiang. But we know, and we have reported so much about the persecution that the CCP is waging against them today. And they are not belonging to any ethnic minority. So it's a war against Islam, because it's a war against religion. The same happens to the Tibetan Buddhists. Tibetan Buddhists, officially, again, Buddhism cannot be labeled as a cult, but we know that it's strictly forbidden, especially in Tibet, where there is also a political problem, a very old political problem, and we don't deal with that as bitter winter, but we know that. So Tibetan Buddhism is repressed as such. So practically, you could look at Tibetan Buddhism as belonging to the black market. Maybe the scholars will react to this word because it's not technically true, but practically all of them are segregated, all of them are denied in their rights, religions and human rights. So this is the situation.
And we'll be right back with more after a commercial break. Are there a lot of religious believers in China?
Yes. I remember some studies dating back to some 10 years, maybe 15 years ago, something called God in the Party. Not meaning the fist, but meaning, the CCP, meaning that there is an increasing religious attention, at least, also within the party. We know for sure, and some scholars have studied the unwanted effect of the Tiananmen massacre exactly 30 years ago. And this is in two levels. First of all, the CCP at that time, 30 years ago, was convinced that what was happening in Soviet Russia and in the East, meaning the crumbling of the Soviet Empire and communism, they thought that it was the effect of some religious groups. And so they studied carefully what was happening there in order to avoid that happening in China. And the Tiananmen massacre can be also, not only, but also explained in the way of repressing potential enemies doing in China what they did in Europe, and that potential enemies are religious groups. Scholars have studied that. They are not convinced that the CCP was